Years ago, I was walking with a friend in Luther Burbank Park. We came to the playfield and were met with a large scattering of crows on the lawn. A park employee happened to be nearby, and I asked him, "What's with all the crows?" He answered, "Oh, don't you know? They circumnavigate the lake every day, stopping at the same place on their route around the shoreline." This statement, whether true or false, struck me as marvelous. Not for the first time, I thought how much fun it would be to be a crow. Slowly an idea formed. Well, why not? Why don't I just make like a crow and explore the whole perimeter of Lake Washington? When I got home, I dragged out my ancient map of Seattle and began an examination of the lake's boundaries. It became clear that this project might take up to a year, and that it would be a lot easier from a boat. However, I don't have a boat, so I made up some rules. I would do my exploring from land, and it would be public land, all the public access points. Typically, I ended up breaking this rule now and then, and I decided to follow my natural bent, which is scrupulously unscientific. I wouldn't be gathering specific data unless it fell into my lap. I wanted simply to explore to see what I could see. I started out believing that I knew my subject pretty well. I'd been swimming in the lake since 1954, after all. In many ways, it has been the biggest constant in my life. But by the end of the year, I was surprised by how little I actually knew. I first stepped into the lake at the age of 4. My mother had signed me up for swim lessons with the formidable Donna Lynn. From my standpoint, shivering knee-deep in the frigid water of early summer, her corseted black bathing suit, her red lipstick, and especially her silver whistle were as terrifying as the demeanor of a drill sergeant. But boy, did she teach us to swim. When that whistle blew, everyone's face was in the water. I persevered and in a few years joined the legendary Mercer Island Beach Club swim team, coached by Johnny Good. In the 50s, yearly dues for the club were about $100. It consisted of a beach, an old clapboard clubhouse, and a dock. The team practiced in the lake, again diving without hesitation at the sound of the coach's whistle. I was surrounded by a whole slew of wonderful older kid athletes who were winning swim meets and setting records in our summer league. We prided ourselves on competing well with the fancier clubs that had pools, and we sometimes scared the visiting swimmers by warning them of leeches. This team was family to me, to the extent that one summer I never took off my bathing suit. Not a terrifically sanitary idea. In my teenage years, I continued to compete on the team, but I expanded my lake activities to water skiing, jumping around on the Renton log boom, and making some long swims across the lake. Eventually, I worked as a lifeguard until I headed off to college. After graduating, I returned home, in part because I missed the coast. A few summers of gliding through the greasy expanses of Lake Union convinced me to get back to cleaner waters, and I began to explore new beaches on Lake Washington. For over a decade, a swim at Howell Beach was my daily goal. I would meet a small group there every afternoon at 3 and take a swim north to Denny Blaine, return to socialize in the sun, and then continued the conversation in Bob and Carol Richmond's Madrona living room over gin and tonics. These lakeside friendships were as free of strife as any I've ever known. In those days, Denny Blaine was already known as a lesbian hangout, and then Howell Beach slowly evolved from a family destination to the center of nude gay sunbathing in Seattle. It is still a friendly scene, but much too specialized for my taste. My alternate beach from the early 80s through the present day is a place that for years I shared with no one but my young nephew, who was my cohort on blackberry picking expeditions. To this day, my Augusts aren't complete without 2 or 3 picking excursions to Martha Washington Park. And I swim there more days than not all summer. In years past, my partner Tommy and I spent countless blissful hours there in our chaise lounges, and after he died, this is where I placed his memorial bench. It is the home of grand American elms and the rare Gary oaks. Many dogs visit, wild with excitement at its broad expanses and cool water. Now and then, wonderful events take place, such as the landing of the Duwamish canoes.
Jack pizza. My name is Jack.
My home beach is Coleman Park, just to the north of Mount Baker Beach. The swim from shore to buoy takes no time at all, and the view of Mount Rainier while one is floating on one's back is spectacular. The last in my quartet of deeply familiar beaches is Hidden Beach. It still belongs to its neighborhood. Grandparents and grandkids play in the sand, dog owners throw sticks to their dogs, kids arrive on their bicycles, and everyone squeezes into the tiny semicircle of grass and sand to change clothes on site. The water always seems fresher here, and the swim across this big protected bay is grand. For some of us, the ultimate purpose of a beach is to launch oneself into the water. However, there are parks on the lake that offer other charms. A grand walkabout, a long sunny dock, tall shady trees, and of course proximity to one's home. Of the beaches I visit regularly, whether to swim or not, Mount Baker Beach, 5 minutes from my house, tops the list. It is here that I turn off the road to watch the sunset, the moon rise, or a particularly gripping storm. I sometimes rise before dawn and watch the sun come up with a cup of coffee in the company of other crazy morning folks. On sunny spring and fall days, I hang out to read the paper and watch the mountain. This is also my chosen spot for attending seasonal rituals. Although the polar bear plunge at Matthews Beach is bigger, our neighborhood splash is, I'm sure, its equal in enthusiasm. And the Christmas ship draws the neighborhood to the water on a dark December night to sit by the bonfire or to stand out on the dock and cheer.
A merry little Christmas.
For a few years, Luther Burbank on Mercer Island was my destination, with an elderly friend who loved to walk. We walked through every season and saw the new leaves unfurl and the old leaves fall. Eventually, we knew every inch of this beautiful park. Its bathing beach, its playfield, its docks and boats, its dog park, its trees and shoreline, and most thoroughly its wetlands, where we watched birds of all sizes in each season. We came to know where the eagles and herons sat. My friend is now gone, and I will always associate him with the early spring call of the red-winged blackbird. All South Seattleites know that Seward Park is the jewel in the crown. It is the place to meet a friend for a good walk and a long talk. It is the place where mamas wheel their babies and families attend kids' wobbly treks on their bikes. It is a runner's dream and a dreamer's paradise. Although there is a life-guarded beach, one can plop in anywhere to cool off. Yacht owners moor there, paddleboarders stroke, and fishers drop their lines. Oh, and almost every big run or swim starts or ends there. As I am a big fan of open water swimming, I made the effort to be present at 2 events, the Seafair Triathlon and the Emerald City Open Water Swim. Witnessing hundreds of adults stepping into the lake and swimming off into the light is a rare sight. What a happy part of our city's history.
Spirits can translate to a good race out there today. More swimmers riding their bikes.
50 plus! Yeah!
Even as I began to strike out into new territory around the lake, I would return time and again to my favorite haunts. I saw them in all seasons and in most times of day. You know, very different things happen on the lake before and after daylight and in the off seasons. If you are looking for solitude, for instance, visit a beach during a storm or late at night. In the dead of winter or just before sunrise. Experiencing a place in all of its moods is a pleasure we don't value enough these days. Visiting the lake at odd times can also bring you unexpected pleasures, like the chorus of "Good Night, Irene" I heard rising from the invisible shore of Martha Washington Park one moonlit night.
Irene, good night. Irene, good night. Good night.
On hot summer evenings, kids will stay in the lake until dark while their parents lounge under the trees. Some people extend their picnics into the wee hours, and drivers roll down their windows to feel the cool lake air on their cheeks. In spring, cherry blossoms line the shore. In autumn, brilliant leaves are the border. Occasionally, winter rain turns to ice, and when it snows, the frosted trees reflect off the surface of the water. Most enchanting of all are the halcyon days at the turn of the year, when the lake is as glassy and still as a painting in a dream. There came a day when I began to roam farther afield. One of my first and lasting realizations was a disheartening one. There is no silence anywhere along the lake. Even when no one was in sight, my solitude was accompanied by the sounds of cars or airplanes, leaf blowers, or construction equipment. We live in a noisy world here, and there is no escape from it. Undaunted, I carried on and began to discover an enormous variety of parks, ranging from the sylvan walkways of Maidenbower to the scruffy combat zone of Northeast 130th, where a public beach is apparently such a threat to the residents on either side of this modest plot of land that access is pretty well cut off. My original plan was to visit every park at least once. However, some of them warranted more time. The first place that called me back was Jean Coulon Park in Renton. Originally, I drove south one night to see what on earth clam lights were. Those lights, the long pier, and the extensive grounds thoroughly charmed me. I returned one afternoon for a stroll down to the fishing dock. On yet another visit, I avoided my own neighborhood's 4th of July explosions with a picnic on Coulon's shore, and I sat out a hot summer evening watching Star Wars on the lawn as the new moon rose. Because I live in Seattle, I have never explored Bellevue's parks. When at last I did, the first beach I found was an unexpected delight. Medina's City Hall perches on the shore of the lake and overlooks the neighborhood's beach. On that January day, I ate my lunch sitting on the park's dock, my only companions a few ducks. I've rarely had such a peaceful afternoon. When I returned on a warm autumn day, it was clear that I wasn't the only one who loved this spot. It is time to mention the cornerstone of these lakeside oases, the lifeguards. Having been one myself long ago, I've always paid attention to them. Their jobs can be truly boring while remaining vitally important. The hours are long and the pay is low. They show up rain or shine, monitor the chaos of crowded summer days, oversee huge events, and stay to clean up in the evening. They are on my list of heroes. I next ventured north to one of the giants in our park department. I had stopped in many times in the past, but had never seen it thoroughly. Magnuson Park has expansive grounds and facilities that serve many populations. Although I limited my interests to the waterside, I couldn't help but be impressed by the extent and variety of services offered, especially that climbing wall. However, my favorite find was the sailing school, in part because I hadn't known it existed. Farther south lay the swimming beach at the foot of a rolling, grassy hill so full of light and air that I never wanted to leave. But when I descended to the beach, the rewards were just as great. I couldn't tell if the kids or the birds were busier. On a couple of very different days, I approached from the south. I was entranced again by the bounty of wildlife, this time swimming through the wetlands. There are several periods of time in Seattle when the temperature isn't ideal for a swim. Although I'd always rather be in the water, I'm also happy to be near it. Pocket parks are the perfect solution for someone like me who needs a daily dose of the lake. I began my explorations in this genre at Leschi, where neighborhood activism had opened up several previously blocked street inns. I found a wonderful cluster of little windows to the water. These are quiet, semi-hidden treasures of space, where a bench is just the spot for an hour with a book, or the perch from which to watch the light and wind on the surface of the lake. Then I moved south on my scavenger hunt for these hidden public spaces. At the bottom of South Willow, I descended a trail to a shady opening that I had all to myself. I also happened upon a park in the making, just to the north of Martha, Washington, where the liberation of the street end was taking place. Next, I headed north to 3 wonderful finds in Madison Park, one in Montlake, and the last at the bottom of a steep staircase on Northeast 43rd. A young friend confided in me that the neighborhood kids used this spot to drink, but all was quiet on the day I found it. Now that I've discovered these secret doorways to the lake, I consider them part of my personal fortune. My passion for the lake is hardly surprising. The water surrounding it naturally influenced life on Mercer Island. My next explorations for this project would take me over the bridge and back to the place I was born. But before renewing my ties with the island, I searched for and found a series of photos I'd taken in the early 80s of old lakeside cottages. I had realized even then that they were vanishing at a dizzying pace, and I wanted to preserve some memories of an earlier era. I mourn the fact that waterfront property on the island has, for a very long time, been reserved for the wealthy. Happily, an abundance of parks currently circle Mercer Island. The first group I found was clustered at the northern end on either side of the I-90 bridge. Sparkling new pocket parks were sprinkled liberally along the water there. Some were extravagantly landscaped, and others were shady swaths of green, perfect for hot August days. Along West Mercer Way, I discovered a couple of spots hidden down long private driveways, and more of these parks than one would wish were simply narrow strips of land that exist to accommodate storm sewers or underground cables. A few of these places exist only on paper, and others have minimal access to the water. But taken as a group, these small public spots are a great asset to the island. With more elbow room is the elder Luther Burbank Park, which has enough space for any level of socializing or privacy. And on either side of the island are two expansive beaches. Clark Beach on East Mercer Way was originally a Brownie Scout camp called Terrywood, and Groveland Beach Park on West Mercer Way served as a Bible camp. Both are accessed by steep descents through woods that open to broad lawns and a variety of amenities. I couldn't resist a last visit to my old stomping grounds, the Mercer Island Beach Club, on a stormy fall day in the company of two swim team pals. The club has been upgraded many times since my childhood, but we could still visualize dance lessons in the former clubhouse, skinny dipping expeditions to Dead Man's Cove, lots of slightly dangerous trips to the log boom near Renton, and some epic cross-lake swims to Kennydale to buy fudgesicles. Mercer Island has always been and remains a dream for water lovers. One day I was thinking again about those impromptu swims across the lake to Kennydale. I realized that I knew almost nothing of the shoreline in that neighborhood. I decided to meander south around the bottom of the lake to see what I could see. With all the diversions I found along the way, it took me many tries to make it to Kennydale, which, by the way, hasn't changed much in all these years. My route lay along Lake Washington Boulevard, a multi-use thoroughfare decades before our city began its love affair with bicycles. Most times of the day or night, the paths running parallel to the streams of cars and bikes on the road are loaded with runners and walkers, with or without their dogs. The fishing dock is rarely empty, and Stan Sayers Park is a constant hub of activity. However, on my first foray south, I saw something unusual out of the corner of my eye. These men, who, I came to find out, regularly fly their motorized creations from a dock across from Seward Park. Having a dad who flew model airplanes all his life, I liked these guys, even though they were a very noisy bunch. A cluster of parks lies between the east side of the lake and my home. Each one of them offers something different. Every time I've stopped at Pritchard Beach, dozens of kids have been splashing in the swimming area. To the south, the Pritchard Wetlands Trail runs through the woods, meeting the Rainier Beach Urban Farm and Wetland, which in turn abuts Beersheba Park. This is not a spot for swimming, but resident ducks are good at ignoring rules. Sweetly running through this green, shady place is Mapes Creek. Standing like a sentinel above the stream is Gyre, an elegant sculpture by John Grade. This park is a lovely place to have a picnic or simply to sit and relax. New to me was the park just south of the Atlantic City boat ramp. Hidden down a steep bank, Chinook Beach Park provides shelter for young salmon coming north out of the Cedar River. However, when I arrived, it was also littered with beer cans, and the smell of pot wafted through the air. Tucked in among the houses that sit cheek by jowl on Lower Rainier Avenue is a humble patch of grass on the water, simply called Community Beach. Frankly, I was thrilled to find it. The houses on this stretch of the road are packed like sardines, and all the gates are locked. For those homes without waterfront, I'm sure this plain Jane beach is a treasure. Just down the road, I came across the Bryn Mawr Beach RV Park. My curiosity was piqued by the anomaly of a trailer park on the lake, and I walked over to the site looking for what I imagined was their sweet spot, the waterfront. Heading downhill, I ran into Mike Taylor, sitting in the afternoon sun. He told me that not only did the owner of the property deny the residents access to the lake, but that the tenants would all be turned out soon and the land sold. So much for that fantasy. On a different day, I took a sharp right turn at this pizza establishment, where I knew I'd find the trail leading up Taylor Creek and Dead Horse Canyon. I wanted to locate as many of the streams and rivers that feed our lake as possible, and this was one of the largest. It has benefited from many years of habitat restoration. The densely wooded canyon instantly muffles the traffic noise from Rainier Avenue, providing a half-mile or so of peace and quiet in the city. A much bigger waterway is the Cedar River, which drains into Lake Washington at Renton. Originally, it joined the Black River, but when the ship canal was built in 1916, the lake dropped 9 feet and the Black River dried up. It exists now as a riparian forest and wetland, and the cedar flows directly into the lake. Cedar River Trails extends all the way to its mouth, where the city of Renton Boathouse sits across from the Boeing Renton plant. A little farther upriver is the Renton Library, a miraculously located building for those of us who like to sit and read near running water. After a refreshing stop at the mouth of Johns Creek in Renton, I finally made it around the bottom of the lake and headed north. I waved at Kennydale as I turned off the main road and drove into a neighborhood I'd rarely visited. As one of the few Seattleites not besotted with the Seahawks, I was surprised to find their huge training center on prime waterfront. A better surprise for me was my first visit to Newcastle Beach Park. It is beautiful, expansive, and chock full of amenities. However, on the cool, windy day I discovered it, I was almost alone. Only a few hardy moms and their kids were playing in the sand. In a warmer month, I'm told that Round the Rock, a great paddleboard race around Mercer Island, which raises money for pediatric cancer research, launches from this beach. I'm sure the park is filled to the gills then. I left off exploring more of Bellevue's beaches for another day. Instead, I went in search of 2 more streams, Coal Creek and May Creek, with the anticipation that their entry into the lake, like Johns Creek, would be on public land. This hope was dashed in both cases. As the streams near the lake, they both run through private property. In the case of May Creek, the flow is actually fenced off and declared off-limits to non-residents. Seems wrong to me. I was somewhat mollified when I found a public path upstream on May Creek and read about the pioneer widow Clarissa Coleman, who made her home there. The times she lived in were very hard, but there were fewer fences. Wetlands buffer many of these creeks and rivers. They encompass some of the most lush and wild acreage surrounding the lake. They are as various as their waterways, ranging from the narrow fringes that border McAleer Creek at its mouth, which once again is hemmed in by private property, to small fecund hollows like the marshy plot at Madrona Park, to long meandering ecosystems like Mercer Slough. 3 streams, including Kelsey Creek, drain into the slough's 320 acres. It is the migration route for Chinook, coho, and sockeye salmon. It hosts a heron rookery, the Nature Park Environmental Center, and a myriad of beautiful trails throughout its wilderness. And many of us who grew up here had our first job picking blueberries in the neighboring fields. Wetlands are the best bet to finding solitude in the city, to sit and take in the wealth of the natural world. Even damp little pieces of forest like the Wetherell Nature Preserve between Yarrow and Hunts Point are an alternate reality from the freeways close by. Morningside Park, a steep and completely undeveloped waterside cliff, gave me an hour of solitary adventure, this kingfisher my only companion. Yesler Swamp at the southern end of the urban horticulture center may be more visited, but the habitat restoration that has taken place there has turned this former lumber mill into a veritable Eden, green and teeming with wildlife. Just to the north is the Union Bay Natural Area, 74 acres of undeveloped land along the lake. Different paths wind through marshes, still ponds, streams, and open water. Everywhere are vacant corners where the city fades away and the birds take over. So many neighborhoods have worked to restore their own waterways and wetlands. Thornton Creek, which empties into the lake at Matthews Beach, has been vastly improved by both citizen activism and the city of Seattle. The mouth of Lion Creek in Montlake Terrace has been planted with 5,000 plants and shrubs, and 3/4 of an acre at its entry into the lake is now public. Logboom Park, just south of Harbor Village Marina and Kenmore Air, protects Little Creek and identifies its place in the Sammamish people's history. Many efforts over the years have been made to mitigate the pollutants running into Juanita Creek, resulting in a beautiful wetland. Land donated by individuals is often the source of wild open space, as is the case of Squaw Slough, where the Sammamish River runs into the lake. There are plaques all around the lake reminding us that our most verdant spaces exist because of a person or family's generosity. The Arboretum, and especially Marsh and Foster Islands, have extensive wetlands. In fact, Foster Island is so much a part of the lake that it often seems to be floating. A large portion of its expanse did not even exist before the Montlake Cut was dredged and the lake lowered. It is a true waterland, home of beaver dams, scores of turtles, otters, fish, and birds. Upon meeting fisherman Corey Hoyt there, I found out that it was also the residence of a Mohawk named Three Stars, who lived for years hidden in the backwaters near the 520 bridge on his silver-bottomed boat. Corey had some great fish tales of catching sturgeon in the cut and of seeing a 40-pound carp jump out of the lake, but Three Stars' stories were even more colorful. He had given most of the turtles, beavers, and Canada geese names. One saga described the loud battles between male geese over territory in the winter months, including an epic fight where one old goose named Pops lost most of his tail feathers. I wish I'd had the time to hear all of Three Stars' stories. One wetland thwarted my attempts to reach it by land. Yarrow Bay Wetlands supposedly has trails that lead to its interior, but they eluded me. I chose to approach via the water in a little rented kayak. On the way there, a friend and I stopped at a very accessible park, Juanita Bay Park. Its long green corridors and waterside walkways gave us unlimited places from which to enjoy the wildlife. Nonetheless, the highlight of the day was our paddle through the bay and up Yarrow Creek. We were the only people there to float around with the ducks among the lily pads. Here, as with most of the lake's wetlands, the action is abundant and none of it involves traffic. I got a kick out of paddling around in my rented kayak. I'm no exception, as boating on the lake is an activity loved by almost everyone. This passion started a long time ago. Whether for fun or practical reasons, people have always liked being on the lake, if not in it. Now the variety of floating transportation is vast. There are those, like me, who are looking for as much solitude as they can find. They are the ones in kayaks, canoes, rowboats, and odd, unidentifiable crafts. Or they're sliding at a measured pace across the water on their paddleboards. The fishers can be in this category, and so are some of the sailors. Then there are those who like to cruise as fast as possible up and down and around the lake, or to putt casually along the shore. On many occasions, these disparate worlds collide, or at least they bounce in each other's wakes as they pass by. Usually the lake is big enough for everyone, but now and then things get crazy. The extreme example of big, noisy boating is Seafair, an event I strive to avoid. For one thing, my cats become catatonic with fear while the Blue Angels are strafing my house. Nonetheless, it is a revered Seattle party that thousands of fans adore. To each his own. Me, I prefer the sailing regattas or the Santas on paddleboards raising money for charity. The other big boating celebration is more colorful and somewhat quieter. Opening Day takes place on the first Saturday in May, and although I haven't attended this event since 1982, I love the cavalcade of boats parading through the Montlake Cut. The apex of the day are the crew races. Our legendary university teams set a tradition long ago that is still going strong. Many people in our region row. They are in their shells by sunup, rain or shine, skimming their way like silver and golden arrows over the water. Others gather after work in canoes, heading off into the summer's evening light. They are as ubiquitous as the crows. While everyone else is out on the lake having a good time, others are putting in a day of work. The construction we see all over the city is also happening on the water. Police and fire boats are on patrol. Park workers repair docks. Barges haul huge loads to and fro. As important as they all are, I'm betting that none of them is having as much fun as my favorite group of boaters, those multitudes who are spinning, drifting, and lazing in the heat of a July afternoon on their inner tubes. What is summer for, anyway? I put my inner tube away and headed north, stopping at the parks that stretch up the west side of the lake from I-90. Madrona Park has wonderful picnic facilities, sloping lawns, a good-sized beach, a very popular floating dock, and it is the home of the Madrona Dance Studios. I often see kids playing in the water until dark there, and people dining al fresco into November. Madison Park is just as popular, if not more so. All summer the party reigns. Swimmers, sunbathers, people watchers, nappers, they all settle in for the afternoon. A friendly vibe prevails despite the crowds. Nachos and margaritas are nearby. What's not to like? Magnuson Park is always worth another visit. Its size ensures there is plenty of space for everyone to enjoy him or herself at whatever pursuit. Matthews Beach has the largest bathing beach on the lake. Huge crowds of children swim there all summer. Some of us prefer a little shade instead, and this park provides for us as well. It is a place loved by its neighborhood year-round. The next long expanse of shoreline is devoid of public access to the water. I came across one private park, and again long lines of homes squeezed in shoulder to shoulder on the lakefront. Burt Gilman Trail runs parallel to this wall of houses, but with the exception of Lion Creek, not until Log Boom Park are there any real openings to the water. Cyclists and fishers dominated that park on the day I visited. I also was impressed by its beautiful mosaic. Up and over the lake I drove, right into the enormous and mysterious St. Edward's Park. This vast space surrounds St. Thomas Center, home of Bastyr University. It is the setting for an imposing former Catholic seminary, the state's largest children's playground, extensive trails for biking and hiking, and a beautiful forest that leads down to a long, utterly undeveloped shoreline. As a swimmer, I felt somewhat thwarted by the lack of amenities at the beach, but obviously the park's priorities lie elsewhere. Until I began my lake explorations, I never knew O.O. Denny Park existed. It was a children's overnight camp for a long time, but now it is solely a day-use park. What a green and peaceful piece of waterfront it is, with graceful old trees and a small wetland where Denny Creek enters the lake. Many of my forays to new parks were made during an off-season. Such was the case with Juanita Beach Park, but it was humming with activity nonetheless. The long walkway over the water just asks to be used, no matter what the weather may be, and the beach always has company. The obvious direction to head was south. Kirkland lies on the opposite side of the lake and far to the north of my home. and as such, its beaches were as unknown to me as any in the country. When I explored the long expanses of groomed, grassy shoreline in this city, I was completely charmed and a little envious. The landscaping of these parks was impeccable. Even the street ends were festooned with blossoms and meandering walkways. Access was easy for everyone, and a myriad of activities and socializing were in full force at every destination. To the north of town and off the main road, I found a recently restored and adorable beach, Waverly Park. With its playground, lawn, and protected swimming area, it is well set up for kids. But my favorite feature was its wraparound dock with a recessed strip for sitting or sunbathing. Fishers and loungers all have room to do their own thing. Another tiny stopping place, Kiwanis Park, also lay hidden down a side road. This is a place to pause and to take a deep breath before emerging into the center of Kirkland's beautiful lakeshore that is used by the multitudes. Marina Park hosted a lovely open-air pavilion and a great curve of steps into the water, which was scattered with people on the day of my visit. As I continued south to David E. Brink Park, Marsh Park, and Doris Cooper Houghton Beach Park, I found people playing volleyball, renting kayaks, and pausing on their bikes for picnics. There were several docks on which to stroll and benches for taking in the air. And in almost every spot were sculptures, ranging from representational pieces to abstract art. My overall impression was how thoroughly different kinds of people were enjoying these beautiful, well-tended spaces. Speaking of benches, I am one of those who loves a good bench. All around the lake one sees people like me who sit down and stay a spell, whether to think through something caught in their minds or to shut down thinking altogether. For me and many others, these humble outdoor perches are the heart and soul of public spaces. I drove around the top of the lake to reach my Kirkland destinations, but most of us drive over either the I-90 or 520 bridge when traveling east and west. Our floating bridges were marvelous feats of engineering when first built, but we grew accustomed so long ago to their sleek, low profiles that now we focus solely on how long it takes us to get across the water during rush hour. And the poor East Channel Bridge serves merely as a short track to jockey for position while moving east, west, north, or south. I am fairly sure that everyone's most frequent and unfortunately most distracted and disjointed perception of the lake occurs from a vehicle traveling as fast as possible over one of these bridges. The proximity of a wilder, greener world, literally just under the radar, remains unknown to most commuters. Maybe when a bridge is up, or during a traffic jam, a glimpse of another reality appears. But usually we just cruise along, our eyes on the road. Occasionally, a day in history can change that scenario. One was when the I-90 bridge went down in a storm. Another was April 2nd, 2016, when after months of construction on the new, improved 520 bridge, the city celebrated its near completion by reserving the day for pedestrians to walk its span. Thousands of people jumped at the chance to experience this traverse on foot. We all took a long urban walk together, and our sense of community was enhanced. The spectacle of our lake shining with light was well worth the time. I wonder how many people who aren't residents of these neighborhoods have wandered onto the Three Fingers of Land, Evergreen, Hunts, and Yarrow Points, just to the north of the 520 bridge. I admit that I was reluctant to venture into such a wealthy enclave, and when I did, I was not surprised that my presence was not exactly welcomed. Admittedly, I had found the Wetherell Nature Reserve without too much trouble, but when I went looking for some street-end parks, things became more difficult. Whereas these lakefronts are public spaces, the public seems to mean those who live in the immediate vicinity. There were no legal places to park at the two lovely spots I found. Yarrow Bay Beach Park is beautifully maintained, and I am sure well used in the summer. The Lake Lane public dock, looking out over Fairweather Bay on the east side of Evergreen Point, is once again a convenience for this community only. Although boats from outside the neighborhood may not moor in this bay, at least the flotilla of coots are allowed to float freely, a spectacle that I sat down to watch and deeply enjoyed. My courage failed me before locating Loch Lane Beach, and I moved south to Bellevue's string of enchanting parks. Many of them seem almost private, down steep embankments to deliciously green and nurtured spaces, each with docks, picnic areas, and swimming beaches. Clyde Beach is a small park with a charming boathouse. This little oasis was completely empty when I stopped by. I can't imagine why. Just to the south is another jewel, Maidenbower Beach Park. The approach to the beach through shady woods promises great things. An arrival at the beachfront does not disappoint. It delivers green lawns, open water, and a sense of serenity just minutes from Bellevue's downtown. Maidenbower Bay Park to the south lies close to the Bellevue Marina and the Maidenbower Bay Yacht Club. It is in the midst of a grand makeover that will turn it into an expansive, accessible amenity for the city. Chisholm Beach offers 2 levels of parkland, the upper specifically for parties and picnics, the lower a panoply of options in a location that again feels like a hidden Shangri-La. To spend summer afternoons here is high on my list of how to live a good life. It seems as if many, including this lucky heron, feel the same way. Somewhere in my meanderings, I found a little pocket park at Southeast 15th Street. As with all of Bellevue's public spaces, it was inviting and well maintained. I wandered through Beaux-Arts Village to find Chesterfield Beach Park. Its narrow acreage descended steeply from a street inn down to a sweet piece of lawn and a dock, where I met Pete Marshall and Cappy, enjoying the sun and the water all by themselves. My last stop was an old favorite of mine, Enitai Beach Park, crouching under the East Channel Bridge. My swim team raced there in the 50s, our starting block a floating log. It is upgraded since then and is now the place to rent canoes or kayaks for paddling up Mercer Slough. I have gone up that lazy river in years past and highly recommend the voyage. But this time I simply sat under the bridge and gazed out contentedly at the Mercer Island boat launch across the way. The freeway traffic whizzed by overhead, but I hardly heard it. Well, the crows made it around the lake much faster than I, who took a year to explore its shore thoroughly, if not systematically. I may have missed a favorite cove or creek or two, but that's as it should be. Some mystery in the world is a good thing. I also shamelessly passed judgment a few times, but then that is who I am. By the time I had checked everything off my list, I had come to a couple of conclusions about my subject and a whole ream of suggestions. I offer them humbly to all of you lake lovers. First and foremost, what a treasure our lake is, and how lucky are we that so many public beaches line its banks. The distribution isn't even, and many private properties and clubs sit on enviable locations. But by and large, we can all get down to the shore without too much trouble and put our feet in the water. Secondly, although the preponderance of homes on the lake are out of economic reach for most of us, more diversity remains than I had previously realized, and I can only hope that some of it survives. Now, just in case you have grown jaded about this natural wonder so close at hand, here are some thoughts on how to travel to exotic places while staying right here at home. Visit your neighborhood beach. I can promise that something is always going on. I happened by Madison Beach early one summer morning and walked into the launch of Fat Salmon, the annual swim from the I-90 bridge back to Madison Park. Better than the Boston Marathon in my books. Another day, I came across Michaela Woodward, tracing the lake's former shoreline with blue field chalk as she walked from Genesee to Seward Park. This piece of historical art-making commemorated the centennial of the ship canal, an engineering feat that altered many natural features of the landscape. I've seen many works of art around the lake, beautiful works, but this piece of history in motion was the most intriguing of all. While you're at the beach, walk out on a dock. These runways have seen a lot of history and are great platforms from which to catch some sun, or a fish, or the light on the water. Stop to listen to the waves, or the tinkling of boats in a marina. Take a swim, for goodness sakes. Or for more fun, skinny dip under the full moon. In the winter months, wild souls like the Northwest water monkeys are still out on the lake. Justin and Jim I met taking a lover's plunge on Leap Day. If the water is too frigid for your taste, your dog may still enjoy jumping in, and the birds are always game. Even if you are not a birder, you can't help but see an astonishing display of avian activity at every lake visit. Crows aren't the only birds out and about. If you'd rather save your visits for summer, consider checking out your nearest beach on the 4th of July. The fireworks may be less spectacular than on Lake Union, but you only need look up into the sky or across the water to see bursts of light everywhere. And on a summer's day, you can see all kinds of people doing their thing on or beside the lake. Boaters, rappers, runners, loners, fishers, and my favorites, the lovers who curl up together to watch the show.
You don't know what love is until you've learned the meaning.
Hang with the crowd on one of the fishing docks, or rent a boat and take off. Sit down to paint, or find a spot to write a poem. Our beautiful lake is calling you.